and I'll go on modify here.
The title is An Unknown Friend.
Yes. Om Ajnanaatimirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshur Unmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Ena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Namavam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namini Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasavi Gaura Bhaktaranda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay. Unknown Friend, chapter 6, Unknown Friend. So we read until teachings of Bhagavad-Gita. Abhay then gave a summary of Bhagavad-Gita in 10 points, concluding the highest service that can be rendered to mankind is therefore to preach the philosophy on religion of Bhagavad-Gita for all time, all places, and all people. So that's where we're going to start from. Chapter 6, Unknown Friend. Okay. I will read for a minute and then others can be ready to read after that. I'll read for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, something like that. But extended philosophy, I'll read the previous paragraph. The true religion of love is perfectly inculcated in the Bhagavad-Gita. Besides, you have not quoted any authority for all your statements. So it is more or less dogmatic. If different men put different dogmatic views about religion and its essentials, who is to be accepted and who is not to be? Therefore, the approach shall be and must be authoritative, scientific, and universal. Abhay then gave a summary of the Bhagavad-Gita in 10 points, concluding the highest service that can be rendered to mankind is therefore to preach the philosophy and religion of Bhagavad-Gita for all time, all place, and all people. Just to give the context to everyone, so far Prabhupada's initiation is done, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur left the world, and the previous chapter was the war. There is a lot of breakdown happen in the Gaudiya mission, and Prabhupada was also wondering, like, how everything got broken out. Basically, Gaudiya mission split into different parties, and devotees are leaving the movement, and so on. In addition to that war, the World War also was happening. There was also a lot of bombing, everything happening. Between all this, Prabhupada starts the factory, and it is going successfully in Lucknow. But towards the end of the chapter, we came to understand that it's not going in the, he's not having enough help. He's getting split between family responsibilities, business treasures, and the spiritual life. So now in this chapter, he is just trying to hit the big shots of the world. That is the Mahatma Gandhi and the other king, other Maharaj Pratap Raja is another person who are all doing some welfare activities. So here, Prabhupada was talking to that Maharaj Pratap Raja, Mahendra Pratap, Mahendra Pratap Raja, who was running World Federation, and he was encouraging to base it on Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so he was writing letters. He was getting some reply, and then I'm continuing from there. But the extended philosophical dialogue was not usually the result of his letters. In 1947, when Abhay wrote to high government officers of the newly formed government of India, suggesting a remedy for riots, they turned him away. When he asked to talk with the governor of West Bengal, the governor secretary replied, "His Excellency regrets that he is unable to grant you an interview at present, owing to heavy pressure of work." So when he wrote to the assistant secretary to the Minister of Education, an assistant to the assistant secretary replied, "The government of India regret that they are unable to accede to your request. Sometimes official interest took the form of patronizing pat on the head. I'm sure your scheme for establishing peace will meet with response from our Prime Minister. And another, the Minister of Education, is glad to see you are taking to rout out communalism. He suggests that you get in touch with so and so." A local official asked not to be seen. They say that, "I thank you for all that you have written and the fine sentiments which you have expressed. It's no use arguing the matters, as I do not know that I can serve any useful purpose by joining the organization which you wish to set up. And therefore, you need not take the trouble of seeing me. I wish you, however, all success." In October, after the Calcutta riots of 1947, Abhay wrote to the chairman of Rehabilitation Committee, who replied, "Regarding Harikirtan and Prasadam, you may make any program of your own, but I'm afraid I'm not interested in the same, nor my committee, and therefore there is no necessity of your meeting with me." Abhay was fulfilling his role as a Vaishnava preacher, and the secretaries of the various government offices were recognizing and addressing him as such. But they could not appreciate his applications of philosophy of Bhagavad Gita and his suggestion of Harikirtana. Occasionally, however, someone seemed interested. Mr. N.P. Asthana, a High Court advocate, replied, "I am very much obliged to you for your letter regarding your broad scheme about spiritual improvement. I thoroughly appreciate the fine feelings which have prompted you to write this letter and the kindness with which you have considered my query. I have been a student of Bhagavad Gita and have also imbibed some of its teachings, but I still lack a good deal and will be glad to be guided by a person of your accomplishment. You may kindly, therefore, send your scheme to me, on receipt of which I will be able to express my views." So finally, after sending so many letters to so many people where there were no responses, and even if there is a response, saying thank you, and even if they uh, go further, touch me not. But this is one response that was looking favorable. It was inevitable that Abhay would think of engaging Mahatma Gandhi in devotional service because of his lifetime of courageous, ascetic, and moral activities on behalf of his countrymen. Mahatma Gandhi had great power to influence the Indian masses. As with Maharaj Pratap of the World Federation, Mahatma Gandhi's idea of serving God was try to bring happiness to man through politics and through his own invented methods. As one Englishman had said of Mahatma Gandhi, he is either a saint amongst the politicians or a politician amongst the saints. But be that as it may, he may not as yet fully engaged in pure devotional service, and his activities were not those of Mahatma as described in Bhagavad Gita. The Gita defines a Mahatma as one who engages in worshipping Lord Krishna as a personality of Godhead, always chanting his glories. So the Mahatma encourages others to surrender to Krishna. But because as a young man, Abhay had been a follower of Gandhi's, Abhay had a special feeling for him. Of course, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had later convinced him to engage exclusively in devotional service. But now, Abhay felt his old friendship for Gandhi, even though Gandhi was a towering figure of worldwide fame and Abhay unknown both to Gandhi and to the world. So on December 7, 1947, Abhay wrote to Gandhi from Kanpur. Gandhi was living at the Birla Mansion in Delhi, where large military forces throughout the city discouraged Hindu-Muslim rioting. Gandhi's secretary, Pyarilal Nair, described Gandhi at this time as the saddest man one could picture. The man he had led in the struggle for Indian independence, Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, and others had taken the leadership of the nation, and Gandhi, with his doctrines of nonviolence, unity, and agrarianism, and now at odds with them in many ways. He feared he was becoming an anarchism. His former colleagues admired him but rejected his leadership. All his programs, Hindu-Muslim unity, non-violence, upliftment for the poor, all the praise throughout the world were failures in India of 1947. On a recent visit to Muslim refugee camp, a crowd of Muslims who surrounded his car had cursed him, and at a public prayer meeting, a Hindu crowd had shouted him down and ended his meeting when he was attempted to read from the Quran. At 78 years, Gandhi was physically weak and melancholy. In all likelihood, Abhay's letter would never reach him. Abhay knew it. Sending a letter to Gandhi would be like putting a note in a bottle and sending it to sea. It would arrive in the flood of mail, and Gandhi would be too busy to see it. But Abhay sent it nonetheless. This is the concept of unknown friend. So, Prabhupada letters to Mahatma Gandhi goes from here. Someone want to read from here? And also, someone needs to manage the call today. I'll be a little occupied from 6 o'clock. So please, get it going yourself, devotees. Okay. We can all take turn like 15 minutes and then say something and then others continue like that. Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, I won't be able to read, but I will listen the whole. I'm driving. Okay.
Okay. Sure, Mother. Yeah. Who wants to read?
I can read, Prabhuji. Dear friend Mahatma Ji, please accept my respectful namaskar. I am your own unknown friend, but I had to write to you at times and again, although you never cared to reply them. I sent you my papers back to Godhead, but your secretaries told me that you have very little time to read the letters and much less for reading the magazines. I asked for an interview with you, but your busy secretaries never cared to reply this. Anyway, as I am your very old friend, although unknown to you, I am writing to you in order to bring you to the rightful position deserved by you. As a sincere friend, I must not deviate from my duty towards a friend like you, like your good self. I tell you as a sincere friend that you must immediately retire from active politics if you do not desire to die on an inglorious death. You have 125 years to live, as you have desired to live, but if you die an inglorious death, it is no worth. The honor and prestige that you have obtained during the course of your present lifetime were not possible to be obtained by anyone else within the living memory. But you must know that all these honors and prestiges were false in as much as they were created by the illusory energy of Godhead called the Maya. By this falsity, I don't mean to say that your so many friends were false to you, nor you were false to them. By this falsity, I mean illusion, or in other words, the false friendship and honors obtained thereby were but creation of Maya, and therefore they are always temporary or false, as you may call it. But none of you, neither your friends nor yourself, know this truth. A sadhu is not supposed to flatter, but to cut. This is the basis of his friendship, that he cuts away the illusion of the materialistic person. Mahatma Gandhi, forsaken by his friends, bitterly disappointed at the outcome of long, hard struggle of Indian independence, and apprehensive about the future, had been reduced to a position in which he might be able to realize that his friends and work were ultimately illusory. Thus, it was the perfect time for him to comprehend Abhay's message. Now, by the grace of God, that illusion is going to be declared, and thus your faithful friends like Acharya Kripalini and others are accusing you for your inability at the present moment to give them any practical program of work as you happen to give them during your glorious days of non-cooperation movement. So you are also in a plight to find out a proper solution for the present political tangle created by your opponents. You should therefore take a note of warning from your insignificant friend like me that unless you retire timely from politics and engage yourself 100% in the preaching work of Bhagavad-Gita, which is the real function of the Mahatmas, you shall have to meet with such inglorious deaths as Mussolini, Hitler, or Lloyd George met with. For years, Abhay had wanted to approach Mahatma Gandhi with this message. In fact, he had written before, although it had been of no avail. But now he was convinced that unless Gandhi got out of politics, he would soon die an inglorious death. That Gandhi was remaining active in politics rather than preaching devotional service put him in need of warning. Abhay was writing to save a friend. You can easily understand as to how some of your political enemies in the graph of friends, both Indian and English, have deliberately cheated you and have broken your heart by doing the same mischief for which you have struggled so hard for so many years. You wanted chiefly Hindu Muslim unity in India, and they have tactfully managed to undo your work by creation of the Pakistan and India separately. You wanted freedom for India, but they have given permanent independence of India. You wanted to do something for the upliftment of the position of the Bhangis, but they are still rotting as Bhangis, even though you are living in the Bhangi colony. They are all therefore illusions. And when these things will be presented to you as they are, you must consider them as God sent. God has favored you by dissipating the illusion you were hovering in, and by the same illusion you were nursing those ideas as truth. Abhay dutifully attempted to inform Gandhi that there was nothing absolute within this relative world. Ahimsa, or non-violence, must always be followed by violence, just as light is followed by darkness. Nothing is absolute truth in the dual world. You did not know this, wrote Abhay. Neither you ever cared to know this from the right sources, and therefore all your attempts to create unity were followed by disunity, and ahimsa was followed by himsa. Abhay pointed out that Gandhi had never undergone the standard practice for spiritual advancement, namely accepting a bona fide spiritual master. All the Bhagavad-Gita declares the necessity of accepting a guru in disciplic succession. Gandhi was well known for listening to his inner voice and for extracting ideas from various writers like Ruskin and Thoreau and mixing them with the teachings of the New Testament and the Gita. Had Gandhi approached a guru, said Abhay, he would not have become bewildered within the sphere of relative truth. In the Katha Upanishad, it is ordered that one must approach the bona fide guru who is not only well versed in all the scriptures of the world, but is also the realized soul in Brahman, the absolute, in order to learn the science of absolute truth. So also it is instructed in Bhagavad Gita as follows. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadeshanti te jnanam jnanina tattvadarshina 4.34. But I know that you never underwent such transcendental teaching except some severe penances which you invested for your purpose, as you have invented so many things in the course of experimenting with the relative truths. You might have easily avoided them if you had approached the Guru as above mentioned. Recognizing Mahatma Gandhi's godly qualities and austerities, Abhay requested him to employ his moral elevation for surrendering to the absolute truth. Abhay urged him to get out of the politics immediately. But your sincere efforts to attain some godly qualities by austerities, etc., surely have raised you to some higher platform which you can better utilize for the purpose of the absolute truth. If you, however, remain satisfied with such a temporary position only and do not try to know the absolute truth, then surely you are all to fall down from the artificially exalted position under the laws of nature. But if you want really to approach the absolute truth and want to do some real good to the people in the general, all over the world, which shall include your ideas of unity, peace, and non-violence, then you must give up the rotten politics immediately and rise up for the preaching work of the philosophy and religion of Bhagavad Gita without offering unnecessary and dogmatic interpretation on them. I had occasionally discussed this subject in my paper, Back to Godhead, and the leaf from the same is enclosed here within for your reference. I would only suggest you to retire from the politics at least for a month only and let us have discussion on Bhagavad Gita. I am sure thereby that you shall get new light from the result of such discussions, not only for your benefit, but for the benefit of the world at large. As I know that you are a sincere, honest, and moralist, awaiting your early reply with interest. Yours sincerely, Abhay Charan Dev. Yeah, so it was a big long letter Srila Prabhupada wrote to Mahatma Gandhi to quit the politics, but he never listened. It was like pleading request. Prabhupada is asking Mahatma Gandhi to get out because he could foresee the destruction that he might die soon, inglorious death. Like repeatedly he was telling inglorious death. So he even quoted Hitler and etc. Like giving him options because Gandhi was showing non-violence, but the real meaning of Krishna consciousness, God consciousness. He like Prabhupada. He even said that please quit for a month, and we can discuss about Gita so that you can show the light to all the others. So it was a pleading letter. It's like I feel, yeah, how much Prabhupada put effort to help the humanity to get to God consciousness. So I really appreciate Prabhupada through this letter. If somebody can go from the next, yeah, that would be good. I will stop here. So we have to start from there was no reply.
Thank you, Matri. I can now continue. There was no reply. A month later, Gandhi announced that he would fast until death unless India made a payment of 550 million rupees to Pakistan, a previous condition of the partition agreement. At first, Hindu refugees from Pakistan demonstrated outside Gandhi's darkened room, chanting, "Let Gandhi die." But as he fasted, each day closer to death, he aroused the heartfelt concern of the nation, and the government leaders repaid the money to Pakistan. Then great crowds approached him, chanting, "Let Gandhi live." Meanwhile, Hindu-Muslim violence continued. On January 30, the day after he had drafted a new constitution for the Congress party, Gandhi took his evening meal, worked at his spinning wheel, then walked towards his evening prayer meeting and was shot 3 times in the chest. He died crying out the name of God, "Hey Rama." Abbay's letter of the previous month suddenly read like a prophecy, but it had not been read by the person for whom it had been intended. When the directors of the Mahatma Gandhi Memorial National Fund invited suggestions on how to commemorate Gandhi's life and work, Abbay wrote to them and simultaneously to Vallabhbhai Patel, India's Deputy Prime Minister, proposing the Gandhian way to use the funds. Gandhi's whole life was dedicated to the service of humanity at large, with special interest for raising the moral standards. His later activities showed that he was equal to everyone, and all the people of the world knew him more as a spiritual leader than a mere politician. Devotion to Godhead was his ultimate aim, and when I say that his sacred memory should be perpetrated not in the ordinary way, but in the Gandhian way, I mean that fitting respects to his memory will be done in the following manner. Abbay wrote of a Mahatma Gandhi rarely described Gandhi as a Vaishnava. Despite his pressing political activities, Gandhi had never missed his daily prayer meetings in the evening. Even at the time of his assassination, he had been on his way to attend his daily kirtana. Abbay stressed that it was because of Gandhi's regular participation in congregational prayer that he had been strong in his work to raise the moral standard of humanity. Gandhiji minus his spiritual activities, Abbay wrote, is an ordinary politician. But actually, he was a saint amongst the statesmen. Abbay wrote that it had been Lord Chaitanya who had originated the congregational chanting of the names of Krishna and Rama, and his followers, the 6 Goswamis, had left a wealth of literature for discussion and understanding. The Memorial Fund Board should take this lesson from Mahatmaji's practical life and develop it on a large scale. Therefore, one fitting memorial to Mahatma Gandhi would be to institute daily congregational readings from the Bhagavad-Gita. When people's spiritual instincts were kindly by daily prayer meetings, then they would develop the highest qualities in their character. Abbay had a second suggestion. Gandhi was known for his attempts to enable the lower classes to enter the temples, and in Nokali, he had installed the deity of Radha and Krishna for the ordinary men to worship. Although this was generally taken as a side issue of Gandhi's work, Abbay took it as a sense that Gandhi's was a theistic movement. Gandhi explained that although there were hundreds and thousands of temples in India, They were not being properly managed, and therefore educated citizens were neglecting them. In the original Vedic culture, the purpose of the temples had been to nurture spiritual culture. If the temples of India could be recognized as vital spiritual centers, then the disturbed minds of the day could be trained for life's higher duties. Such education and practice, Abe wrote, can help man in realizing the existence of God, without whose sanction, according to Mahatma Gandhi, not a blade of grass moves. He also referred to Gandhi's Harijan movement, which most people saw as Gandhi's humanitarian effort to grant equal rights to untouchables, whom Gandhi had recognized as Harijan, people of God. Abe stressed that this way also an essentially spiritual aspect of Gandhi's life. But rather than simply rubber stamping an untouchable as Harijan, Abe argued there must be a systematic program for elevating people of the lower classes. This program was taught in the Bhagavad-Gita and could best be applied under the guidance of a bona fide devotee of God. Abe volunteered to take up the work on behalf of the Memorial Board. If the board, in attempting to commemorate Gandhi's efforts and accomplishments, neglected the essential spiritual aspects of Gandhi's life, Abe warned his memory will soon be dead, as has been a lot of other politicians. Perhaps they saw Abe as another opportunist seeking money or as a sectarian religionist, but Abe saw himself as a lowly servant of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Seeing certain Vaishnava qualities in the character of Mahatma Gandhi, Abe took the opportunity to introduce his spiritual master's message to the world. And by so doing, he paid tribute to Mahatma Gandhi, praising him as a great devotee, interested in Kirtana, temple worship, and elevating unfortunates to become people of God. While on business in Madurai, in South India, Abe showed some of his writings to Muthuswamy Chetty, another medical salesman. Mr. Shetty was impressed and felt he could persuade his wealthy friend, Dr. Alagappa, the famous Birla of the South, to finance the printing. In April of 1948, Mr. Shetty wrote to Abe saying that Mr. Chetty wrote to Abe saying that he had been prompted to help Abe for something God has meant. He asked Abe Charan to send him the complete Gita Upanishad manuscript so that he could present it to Dr. Alagappa in Madras. Mr. Chetty had already written Dr. Alagappa about the first class work Gita Upanishad to cover 1200 pages of royal size and had urged him to publish it for the benefit of religious minded people. He had also mentioned that Abe had been trying to publish the book since 1946. Dr. Alagappa soon replied to Mr. Chetty that he was interested, and Mr. Chetty wrote to Abe, "So I am on my way to help you, and only God must help me." As for talking business with Dr. Alagappa, there would be no need, since once he does it, it is for the sake of benevolence. Anticipating success, Mr. Chetty invited Abe to come to Madras to meet Dr. Alagappa. There he will arrange for what God has meant for you to do in your religious duty. In Madras, Abe would be able to check and correct the proofs of the manuscripts and see the book through the various stages of printing. It was a big opportunity, and Abe was not one to miss an opportunity. If the book could be published, it would be a great victory in his mission to fulfill the request of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. But then the worst thing happened. The manuscript was stolen. It was the only copy, the one Abhay was keeping safely at home. He questioned his family and servants. No one knew what had happened. Abhay was baffled. So much work had been undone. He felt he had worked so many months for nothing. Although he could not prove anything, he suspected that his servant or even his son might have done it with a motive for raising money. But it remained a mystery. During 1949, Abhay wrote articles in Bengali and submitted them to his godbrother B.P. Keshav Maharaj, who published them in his Gaudiya Patrika. Abhay's format was addressing world problems was the same as his spiritual masters. Even at their first meeting in 1922, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had countered Abhay's nationalistic arguments by stressing that the real crisis in the world was neither social nor political nor anything material, but was simply the dearth of transcendental knowledge. The death of transcendental knowledge. Abhay simply elaborated on this theme. He never advocated that the ordinary concerns of the world be disregarded, but he stressed that crisis can be solved only when the leadership is God conscious. If Krishna consciousness were put first, the other concerns be brought into line. But without Krishna consciousness, so-called solutions were only folly. Abhay began his first Bengali article by quoting an editorial from the Allahabad edition of the Calcutta newspaper, Amrita Bazaar. The editor had sorely lamented that India's worst troubles had not yet ended, despite national independence. The National Week has begun. The memories of Jallianwala Bagh and political serfdom no longer trouble us, but our trouble is far from being at an end. In the dispensation of providence, mankind cannot have any rest. If one kind of trouble goes, another quickly follows. India, politically free, is faced with difficulties no less serious than those that troubled us under a foreign rule. Abhay seized on this editorial reflection as proof of the basic defect of all worldly plans for amelioration. He pointed out that although India had been subjugated by foreign rulers since the time of Muhammad Ghori, AD 1050, India prior to that had never been subjugated. In those days, India had been a God-conscious nation. It was when India's leaders had abandoned their spiritual heritage that India had fallen. Thus, Indians should see that they were now being punished by the stringent laws of material nature. The honorable editor of Amrita Bazaar Patrika, Abhay noted, had written so sadly, if one trouble goes, another quickly follows. But that was stated in the Bhagavad-Gita a long time previously. It was the same theme he had stated in his 1944 Back to Godhead articles and the theme of so many of his letters also. Man, due to his neglect of the Supreme Lord, is being punished by material nature, which is directly controlled by the Supreme Lord. Men may write newspaper articles, pass measures at meetings and conferences, and attempt to overcome nature by scientific research, yet they will remain unable to surmount nature's law. As they try to escape their punishment, the Supreme Lord will cast them deeper into illusion, and they will fail miserably. Abhay quoted on appropriate Bengali saying, I was trying to make a statue of Shiva, but I ended up making a monkey. In order to rid the world of misery and bring about happiness, we have now created the atomic bomb. Seeing the all-pervading destruction which would take place in the near future, the atomic reaction, Western thinkers have become greatly disturbed. Some people try to give consolation, saying that we will only use this atomic energy to bring about the happiness in the world. This is also another enigma of the illusionary potency. The problem, Abhay explained, was that the world was lacking Krishna conscious devotees. Leaders under the influence of material nature could never solve the problems of the world. Materialistic illusion was especially prevalent in the Western countries, which Indians should not try to imitate. Abhay prophecies, however, that Krishna consciousness would one day reach the West. In the Western countries, there has never been any discussion of the relation between the atomic individual soul and the supreme complete conscious personality of Godhead. Neither their activities nor their state in ultimate perfection has been investigated. That is why, even though they have made so much material advancement, they are simmering in the burning poison of sensualism. We can be absolutely certain that India's real peace formula will one day reach the ears. Abhay's articles began appearing regularly in the Gaudiya Patrika. His god brothers appreciated his writings. His denunciation of the materialistic mentality was reminiscent of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. In Abhay's hands, the Bhagavad-Gita's concept of Asura demon was no longer merely a depiction of a mythological or legendary enemy. The Asuras had come to life in a modern day Hitler, Churchill, or even as Indian Prime Minister. But as Abhay pointed out, his denunciation of the misleaders are not his own. He was only repeating the words of Krishna. So in continuation, with Līlāmṛta's reading, there was no reply from Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, he left his body, but Prabhupada, he took an opportunity to go to a meeting where everyone were talking about, where everyone were consoling, everyone were talking about Mahatma Gandhi's greatness. But Srila Prabhupada, in that meeting, he was talking about how God conscious he was. Like he was doing all his regular prayers, kirtans and everything. So he was seeing the other side of Mahatma Gandhi, where he was kind of Vaishnava. He got few Vaishnava qualities. With the help of Alagappa, he met a few people. With the help of the god brother B.P. Keshava Maharaj, he wanted to publish his writings in the Gaudiya Patrika, but all of a sudden, the Gita, whatever the Gita he had, it was stolen by someone. It was still remaining a mystery. But Abhay, Srila Prabhupada, he always wanted to give his Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati's words to the nation, saying that if the Krishna consciousness comes in the first, if Krishna consciousness is put in the first, then all the concerns will be gone. And so in his articles, he was writing all these things, like how daily the Krishna consciousness, the practices will help mankind to clean his mind, or to have a peace in the nation. So Prabhupada is really trying hard through his articles to say the nation how the Vaishnava qualities will help to have a peace in the nation. Yeah. Someone can take over from here. Hare Krishna. Do you want me to continue?
Yeah. Hare Krishna Mataji. Anusha Mataji, it's from like during 1950-51, he continued his letter writing from there, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. During 1950-51, he continued his letter writing, attempting to gain a hearing with various organizations and leaders. He wrote the World Pacifist Community, the President of India, and the Minister of Education. He wrote to the Indian Pro Congress for Cultural Freedom, which wrote back suggesting that Abhay had written them by mistake. He wrote to an official of the All Religious Conference in Bombay, advising that because of their approach, nothing practical would come out of their conference. The practical solution is lying in the transcendental message of Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, has given by him in the Bhagavad-Gita. On September 14th, 1951, he corresponded with Daniel Bailey of the American Reporter, a magazine published by the American Embassy in New Delhi. Abhay pointed out that the philosophy of understanding the absolute truth, as realized by the sages of India, was higher than attempts to combine East and West. Mr. Bailey replied that he was aware of the Eastern philosophical and religious influence in the West, and cited the progress of a yoga mission in New York City, which he said had come influence on the Protestants in America. But when Abhay asked if one of his articles could appear in the American Reporter, Mr. Bailey replied, if we were to give considerable space in the American Reporter to say the Gita, we in all fairness would have to give equal space to the other philosophies, and our desire is not to endorse or condemn any of them, but simply to assist in a better understanding. In a further reply, Abhay differed with Mr. Bailey's contention that people should be encouraged to make their own interpretation of religion. Less intelligent men are always guided by those who are superior in knowledge in all spheres of life. Abhay even wrote to the Ford Foundation in Detroit, and a staff assistant wrote back, regret to advise you that we are unable to pursue your suggestions concerning the establishment of an association of the intelligent class of people. The Ford Foundation has no program in which specific ideas such as you desire must be included. Although most of his suggestions were rejected, occasionally he received words of appreciation. A certain Dr. Muhammad Syed, PhD, a professor at the University of Allahabad, wrote, you seem to have assimilated the universal teaching of ancient India, which is really laudable. And the governor of Uttar Pradesh replied, you are doing noble work, for nothing is nobler than to be God minded. Not only was Abhay giving advice in his letters, but he was hinting that he could also give practical help if he could obtain institutional backing. He was prepared to do many things: teach classes, manage temples, teach temple worship, and initiate devotees, as well as organize various kinds of field work to propagate the principles of Bhagavad Gita. Usually, he did not spell out exactly how things should be done, but he pointed to the philosophical defects in the present methods and the superiority of working in accord with the Vedic literature. By the grace of his spiritual master, he knew the science of applying Bhagavad Gita to almost any situation. If someone would only show interest, he could teach that person the superiority of working according to Bhagavad Gita. After attending a meeting in which a prominent industrialist had stressed harmonious relationships between labor and management in his factory, Abhay wrote a long letter suggesting the man consider the good effects the congregational chanting of Hare Krishna could produce. Since the factory had a special employees club and longi, Abhay suggested that the workers assemble there and chant Hare Krishna. Abhay urged everyone to surrender to Krishna, but most people had their own philosophies and took his spirit to be sectarian or proselytizing. But Bhagavad Gita was universal. Abhay wrote, and God could not be omitted from any program, even in the name of a secular state. Krishna, as the father of all living beings, had jurisdiction over all programs, organizations, and governments. Indians especially should appreciate the universal scope of Bhagavad Gita. Although Abhay always had a plan of action behind his suggestions, he first sought the interest of his correspondent. There was not much interest, and he was repeatedly turning down, but he never felt discouraged. He always anticipated finding a sympathizer. He kept copies of all his letters and their replies. A word of appreciation or a slight show of interest from a correspondent being sufficient to elect from Abhay another thoughtful reply. He had developed a keen sense of dedication to Lord Chaitanya's mission without expecting leadership from the Gaudiya Mutt. He still cherished the idea that his god brothers would soon come together and preach, but he did not put any energy in the mattas, since to do so would mean to become involved in one of the factions. Staying clear of the Gaudiya Mutt's internal fray, Abhay continued his letter writing campaign alone, introducing himself as preacher of Bhagavad Gita and editor of Back to Godhead magazine. In 1948, Abhay closed his Lucknow factory. He had fallen behind in employees' salaries, and since 1946, he had been paying past rent in installments. But when sales dropped off, continuing the factory became impossible. He lost everything. Srila Prabhupada, I started a big laboratory in Lucknow. Those were golden days. My business flourished like anything. Everyone in the chemical business knew. Sorry. I started a big laboratory in Lucknow. Those were golden days. My business flourished like anything. Everything in the chemical business knew. But then gradually everything dwindled. With the help of some acquaintances in Allahabad, he opened a small factory there in the same city where his Prayag pharmacy had failed 15 years before. He moved to Allahabad with his son Brundavan, Vrindavan, and continued manufacturing medicines, while the rest of the family remained at Banerjee Lane in Calcutta. Abhay continued his traveling, but now he was often away for months at a time. And then he had the dream a second time. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati appeared before him. Again, he was beckoning, indicating that Abhay should take sannyasa. And again, Abhay had to put the dream aside. He was a householder with many responsibilities. To take sannyasa would mean to give up everything. He had to earn money. He now had 5 children. Why is Guru Maharaja asking me to take sannyasa? He thought it was not possible now. The Allahabad business was unsuccessful. At present, the condition of our business is not very good. He wrote his servant Gauranga, who had asked to rejoin him. When the condition gets better, and if you are free at that time, I will call for you. He worked earnestly, but results were meager. As with everything else, Abhay saw his present circumstances through the eyes of scripture, and he could not help but think of the verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Yasya aham anugrahanani harshiye tadhanam sanaihi tato dhanam त्यजन्ते asya swajanam dukha dukkhitam. When I feel especially merciful towards someone, I gradually take away all his material possessions. His friends and relatives then reject this poverty-stricken and most wretched fellow. He had heard Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati quote the verse, and now he thought of it often. He took it that his present circumstances were controlled by Lord Krishna, who was forcing him into a helpless position, freeing him for preaching Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada, somehow or other, my intention for preaching the message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu increased, and the other side decreased. I was not disinclined, but Krishna forced me. You must give it up. The history is known how it decreased. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, Queen Kunti had also prayed, My dear Lord Krishna, your lordship can easily be approached, but only by those who are materially exhausted. One who is on the path of material progress, trying to improve himself with respectable parentage, great opulence, high education, and bodily beauty, cannot approach you with sincere feeling. Srila Prabhupada. So in 1950, I retired practically, not retired, but a little in touch with business, whatever is going on. Then almost became nil. Whatever was there, all right. You do whatever you like. Abhay's wife independently moved along with her sons back to her father's house. It's a 72 Mahatma Gandhi Road. She had reasoned that her financial support was becoming precarious. Abhay was spending most of his time away from home. He was gradually disassociating himself from the family. When after several months, he would meet his wife and children, his father-in-law would criticize him. You're always going outside. You're always worshipping God. You're not looking after my family. Whenever he could, Abhay would send his family some money. Mr. Sudhir Kumar Datta, Abhay's nephew, I sometimes noticed how he was thinking so many things about his family, about his writings, about making bigger and bigger in business, what to do. He was thinking seriously to earn more money from his business, but that means he has to give more time for his business and his writings. He had never never give up. He was writing more and more, and people sometimes abused him. Hey, you're writing religious things. You're only thinking of God. Then who will maintain your family? What will you do for the family? Sometimes he argued with them. What has this family given me? Why should I forget about God? This is the real thing. What I am doing, you cannot realize what I am doing. On a visit to Calcutta, Abhay stayed at the home of his father-in-law, where he has given his own room. When his wife served him dinner, he noticed that everything had been purchased from the market. How is this? He asked. The cook is sick today. Radharani replied. Abhay thought, it is better that we not live here at the home of her father, or else she will be spoiled even more. So he moved his family to a new address on Chetla Street. Here he sometimes stayed with his family for a few months, writing articles and doing a minimal amount of business. But most of the time, he stayed in Allahabad. In Allahabad, Abhay, now 54, lived like a vanaprastha, or one who has retired from family life. He was indifferent to the activities of family and business, activities a family man generally considers like prime objects of responsibility and happiness. In his writings, Abhay had several times discussed on four ashramas, or spiritual divisions of Vedic society: Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyasa. In the first division, the Brahmachari ashrama, a young boy's parents send him to the place of the Guru or Gurukula, where he lives a simple life, studying the Vedic literature under the guidance of his Guru. This in his childhood and youth, he learns the principles of austerity and spiritual knowledge that form the basis of his for his entire life. At age 21, the brahmachari may take a wife and thus enter the new ashrama, the Grihastha ashrama, or like Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, he may choose to remain a lifelong brahmachari. In his boyhood, Abhay had remained celibate and had imbibed the principles of devotion to Krishna from his father and mother. Although he had lived at home, his upbringing had given the equivalent of brahmachari life. And by marriage, at the age of 21, he had entered the Grihastha at the appropriate age. Gaura Mohan's example had shown Abhay how to remain a devotee of Krishna even in family life. As Vaishnavas, Abhay and his wife had avoided the excesses of materialistic household life. At 50, a man is supposed to retire from his family activities, and this stage is called Vanaprastha. In the Vanaprastha ashrama, both man and wife agree to abstain from further sexual contact. They may continue living together, but the emphasis is on spiritual partnership. As Vanaprasthas, they may travel together on pilgrimage to the holy places in India, preparing for their inevitable departure from the material world. Thus, the Vedic ashramas, after allowing one to fulfill material life, enable one to end the cycle of repeated birth and death and attain the eternal spiritual world. A man of 50 should be able to see by his aging body that inevitable death is approaching, and he should have the good sense to prepare. In the final division, the sannyasa ashrama, the man places his wife in the care of a grown son and fully dedicates himself to serving the Supreme Lord. Formerly, the sannyasa ashrama meant a solitary life of penances in the Himalayas, but in the Gaudiya Vaishnava line, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had emphasized preaching. Although Abhay had not formally defined his status within the four ashramas, he appeared to be living more as a vanaprastha than a grihastha. He saw his business failures and his distasteful family situation as Krishna's blessings, freeing him from family responsibilities and turning him wholeheartedly towards executing Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati's order to preach. In Allahabad, Abhay managed to save money to revive the printing of Back to Godhead, and in February 1952, from his editorial office and home at 57B Canning Road. The first issue in 8 years appeared. As before, he did everything himself, all the writing, typing, editing, meeting with the printer, and finally distributing the copies by hand, as well as mailing them to respectable leaders throughout India. This, he felt, was the real purpose of living in Allahabad or anywhere. This was the best use of money, the purpose of human life, to engage fully in glorifying the Supreme Lord. Other things were temporary and would soon be lost. When he visited his family in Calcutta, old friends would gather in his room and he would preach and give classes on Bhagavad-Gita. Abhay invited his wife and family to take part in these discussions, but they would resolutely sit in an upstairs room, often taking tea as if in defiance of his preaching. Abhay was supporting them. He was still associating with them, but he was bent on preaching, and they were not making it attractive for him to do so within the family. If there were to be family life for Abhay, then his wife and sons would have to recognize and rejoice in the fact that he was becoming a full-fledged preacher. They would have to understand that his life's concern was to serve his spiritual master's mission. They could not simply ignore his transformation. They could not insist that he was simply an ordinary man. Abhay continued to try to draw his wife in, hoping she would gradually follow in the preacher's life. But she had not the slightest interest in her husband's preaching. And why should he spend his days worrying about family, chemicals, and money, like his relatives criticize? But back to Godhead was the real service he could offer to the whole family of mankind. Madhavendra Puri, a great spiritual preceptor and predecessor of Lord Chaitanya, had written about the devotees' indifference to worldly criticism. O demigods and forefathers, please excuse me. I am unable to perform any more offerings for your pleasure. Now I have decided to free myself from all reactions to sins simply by remembering anywhere and everywhere the greatest descent of Yadu and the great enemy of Kamsa, Lord Krishna. I think that this is sufficient for me. So, what is the use of further endeavors? Like the let the sharp moralist accuse me of being illusioned. I do not mind. Experts in Vedic activities may slander me as being misled. Friends and relatives may call me frustrated. My brothers may call me a fool. The wealthy Mammonites may point me out as mad, and the learned philosophers may assert that I am much too proud. Still, my mind does not budge in an inch from the determination to serve the lotus feet of Govinda, though I be unable to do it. Why should he waste time with petty family problems when he held answers to the problems of India and the world? As the knower of Bhagavad Gita, he felt that his first obligation was to offer solutions to the complex crisis of war, hunger, immorality, crime, all symptoms of godlessness. And if dedicating himself to such work meant that other lesser responsibilities suffered, then there was no loss. In March 1952, Abhay published another issue of Back to Godhead. It was dedicated mostly to a biographical article Abhay had written about Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati and his father, Srila Bhakti Vinoda Thakura. He, Bhakti Vinoda Thakura, vehemently protested against the principles of those pseudo-transcendentalists now passed in the name of Lord Chaitanya. He initiated the reformatory movement by literary contributions while he still engaged as a high government officer during his householder life and serving as a magistrate. He wrote books of various descriptions in Bengali, English, Sanskrit, and etc. to present an actual picture of pure devotional activities to Lord Chaitanya. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj had inspiration from his very childhood all about Srila Thakura Bhakti Vinoda's movement. He worked as the private secretary of Srila Bhakti Vinoda Thakura, and as such, Bhakti Vinod Thakur gave him Srila Saraswati Thakur, the transcendental power of attorney to espouse the cause of Lord Chaitanya. And so after Srila Bhakti Vinoda Thakur's departure, Srila Saraswati Thakur took up reins of that reformatory movement. Absorbed in producing his monthly journal, Abhay went about his other activities only superficially. Sometimes he traveled on business or taking the night train from Allahabad to Calcutta, visited his family. When his compartment was not crowded, he would turn on a light while others slept. Riding a night train provided a good opportunity to think or even write. Sometimes he would sleep for a few hours and then sit up again and look out the window to see only night and the reflected lights of the train compartment shining back at him, the windows reflecting his face. Halfway through the 12-hour journey, the sky would lighten, turning from gray to light blue, and the first white clouds would appear in the sky. He could see lights in the towns and hear the train horn warning. When the train slowed and stopped at a station, tea vendors would walk alongside the train windows yelling, "Chai, chai, chai, chai." Their loud sing-song din filling the ears with chai, and chai filling the air with its aroma, as hundreds of passengers sipped their morning tea. During his more than 20 years of extensive train travel, Abhay had noticed more and more people smoking cigarettes and more women traveling alone. India was becoming westernized, and the national leaders were paving the way, the blind leading the blind. They wanted the kingdom of God without God. They wanted a progressive, industrialized India without Krishna. From the windows, he could see large fields being left uncultivated, and yet people were hungry. Abhay would sometimes read a newspaper and cut out an article that seemed to warrant to a reply in Go Back to Godhead, or that sparked an idea for an essay. He could deliberate over how to approach people for assistance, whom to approach, and how to start a society of Krishna conscious devotees. People not only in India but all over the world could take to Krishna consciousness. The Chaitanya Bhagavatam had predicted that the name of Lord Chaitanya would one day be known in every town and village. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta had wanted that. He had sent preachers to England, but they had all gained a protocol visit with the royalty, stood in line, bowed before the crown, and then come back to India without affecting any change in the Western people. Abhay thought about sending back to Godhead abroad. His agents, Thacker, Spink, and Company, had contacts in America and Europe. People read English all over the world, and some of them would surely appreciate the ideas from Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. This was what Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati had wanted. Krishna consciousness was not for India alone. It was for India's greatest gift, and it was for everyone.
Yes, Mataji, you want to summarize?
Yes, Mataji. Yeah. Mainly Prabhupada worked last days like in his Grihastha Ashrama like he worked very hard for his business, his writings, and trying to spend more time with Godhead magazine.
Yeah.
After reading this, Mataji, I am feeling to my heart like how he worked very hard to write, and why I am not able to utilize all his books in reading.
Yes. Yes, Mataji.
See, he has no support from his family, from his wife, and business is also not growing at that old age. He was traveling in the train and still writing, and he was only focusing on his spiritual master's message to preach all over the world.
Yes.
Okay, Mataji, you can continue.
Thank you, Mataji. Chapter 7, Jhansi, the League of Devotees. Wanted candidates from any nationality to qualify themselves as real Brahmins for preaching the teachings of Bhagavad-Gita for all practical purposes throughout the world. Deserving candidates will be provided with free boarding and lodging. Apply A.C. Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary of the League of Devotees, Bharti Bhavan, Post Office, Jhansi, UP. Abhay Charande. It was another 12-hour ride with dozens of stops. The train's rattling and clattering and its rocking from side to side made writing difficult. But Abhay, crowded on the wooden bench with other third-class passengers, kept writing. Within the dingy compartment, passengers eyed one another complacently, and soot and dust blew in the open windows as the train sped along. Outside, past the monotonous embankment of loose stones, bright violet trumpet flowers bloomed on tall stalks in the shallow trackside ditches. Water buffalo and oxen grazed in the distance, or sometimes pulled a plow before a solitary farmer. Abhay was going to Jhansi, not for business, but for preaching. 1 month before, in October 1952, when Abhay had visited Jhansi on business, Mr. Dubey, a customer and the owner of a Jhansi hospital, had invited him to lecture at the Gita Mandir. Many Jhansi people appreciated things religious or humanitarian, whether from Vaishnavas, Theosophists, Mayavadis, politicians, or whatever. They regarded almost any path as dharma, as long as it showed some edifying piety or tended towards the public welfare. Mr. Dubey had read with interest several issues of Back to Godhead and had therefore requested Abhay to speak. Abhay had been eager, and he had found keen interest amongst the audience of more than 100 people, many of them young medical students and graduates from the local Ayurvedic college. Abhay was 56, and his commanding presentation of Krishna consciousness had impressed the young, religious-minded people of Jhansi. 25-year-old Prabhakar Mishra, principal of the Vedanta Sanskrit College and head medical officer of the Jhansi Ayurvedic University, saw that Abhay was very forceful in his desire to spread Krishna consciousness. Dr. Mishra regarded him as a kind of guru, although dressed in white. Here is a humble person, he thought, a real sadhu. Short and stocky Dr. Shastri had just beginning his career in Ayurvedic medicine, was an active young man, fascinated by Abhay's purity and his vision of the world movement for distributing India's culture. Older men like tall, suave Ramcharan Heharan Mitra, a utensils shopkeeper who wrote poetry and wore a white Nehru cap, also wanted to learn more about Lord Chaitanya from Abhay. Dr. Malik, who was the Gita Mandir secretary, and Dr. Siddhi from the university, along with their wives, had sincerely approached Abhay after his talk and asked him to please visit Jhansi again. Abhay had come to them not as a pharmaceutical salesman or as a man with family concerns, but purely as a devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Although the specific applications of Krishna consciousness as given by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati were new to his audience, these teachings had interested them. And the more Abhay had expressed these teachings and spoken of his ambitions for spreading Krishna's message, the more his hearers had encouraged him. Several of them had suggested he conduct his mission in Jhansi, and he had promised to help, and they had promised to help him. Dr. Shastri had even invited Abhay to come live with him. He would introduce Abhay to important citizens and arrange for lectures in the various meeting places of Jhansi. After staying for 10 days, Abhay had returned to Allahabad, but remembering Jhansi, he had been unable to concentrate on his business. Something more important was on his mind: the need for an association of devotees propagating the teachings and practices of Krishna consciousness worldwide. With the Gaudiya Math now broken into permanent schisms, his godbrothers conducting their own private ashramas in separate locales, apparently impervious to any reconciliations, something would have to be done if the overwhelming atmosphere of godlessness were to be corrected. There must emerge, as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had envisioned, a league of preachers with activities worldwide. The nations of the world had sought unity through the League of Nations, and recently through the United Nations. The League had failed, and so would the United Nations, unless it recognized the true spiritual unity and equality of all living beings in terms of their intimate relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Abhay did not expect any good to come of such organizations. Though they wanted peace and unity, their attempts were simply another feature of godlessness. No, creating peace and unity was the duty of Vaishnavas. So Abhay had been thinking that perhaps a likely place to start an organization of devotees would be Jhansi. It wasn't a major city, but at least he had found concerned people. The students had listened and accepted and had said they would help. Abhay had sensed a certain lack of sincerity and depth in their appreciation, and a sentimentality that made him doubt their seriousness. But if he could find a few, or even one, who was serious, then he would have a beginning. He wanted to preach. That was his mission. Besides, he was already getting older. If something were to begin, it should be now. So he would go to Jhansi again to stay for an indefinite duration. Without much concern for his Allahabad affairs, Abhay left his pharmaceutical business with his son and nephew, informing them that he was going to Jhansi. As the train pulled into the station, Abhay saw Dr. Shastri waving energetically. They rode together by Tanga to Dr. Shastri's dispensary, and the talkative, effusive doctor promised many preaching opportunities and interviews. Dr. Shastri also spoke of the lore of Jhansi. The site of the present city had formerly been a part of the forest in which Lord Ramachandra had practiced austerities many thousands of years ago. The Pandavas had lived here during their exile, and since then, many great Vedic sages had their hermitages in the area. Jhansi had also been the home of an Indian heroine, Lakshmi Bai, who in the mid-19th century had taken part in starting the Indian independence movement against the British regime. Statues and pictures of Lakshmi Bai riding a horse and holding a sword to her upraised hand were displayed throughout the town. But the Jhansi of 1952 was a crowded, poor city with dirt streets and minimal technological amenities. Dr. Shastri lived alone in a two-story rented building in Jhansi's Sipri Bazaar. On the first floor, he had his clinic, and upstairs, his one-room residence, which he had offered to share with Abhay. The young but influential doctor was a good person to introduce Abhay to receptive citizens of Jhansi, and he was eager to do so. Outgoing and energetic, he moved easily among the people of his town. He was respectful towards Abhay, who was twice his age, and whom he appreciated as being firmly fixed in the Vaishnava philosophy and way of life. Dr. Shastri saw it as his duty to help Abhay, and he gladly introduced Abhay to others and arranged for lectures. Abhay and Dr. Shastri would cook and eat together like family members. Abhay revealed his idea for a League of Devotees, an organization with worldwide scope but based in Jhansi. The citizens of Jhansi, he said, should all take part in helping spread Lord Krishna's mission. Lord Chaitanya had said that Indians have a special responsibility to distribute God consciousness, both in India and around the world. Dr. Shastri, in his heart, always it was burning that the whole world was suffering in the materialistic view. Everyone is busy and eat, drink, and be merry. So the whole day he was touring and preaching his mission that was prescribed by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his Guru Maharaj. He was having iron-willed determination and self-confidence about his mission. He was not doubtful at all. He was Līlāmṛta, staunchly determined. Actually, he was always preaching Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam, kalau nasteva 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 gatiranyatha. No other way except Hare Krishna Nam. So always discussing, sometimes the whole night, he was discussing with me, and sometimes I was fed up. I was requesting, please don't disturb me. Please let me sleep. And he, the old man, missionary worker, he was just like a young man. I was a young chap, but he was just like my friend, my elder brother. He was like my guide and teacher, because the preacher is a friend, philosopher, and guide. He was always trying to create a good atmosphere through Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad-Gita. The whole Bhagavad-Gita was his practical life. His mission was not a mission of preaching only, but of practical action. He was also trying to catch me for this mission, and I would try to slip away. I did not think he would do any miracle for spiritual revolution of the world, although that is what he urged us. While Dr. Shastri tended his clinic, Abhay sat and spoke with patients, occasionally recommending medicines, but mostly preaching. For now, he was content to live and preach in Jhansi. Here was life, people receptive to his preaching, who responded to his urging them to chant Hare Krishna. His desire and determination to leave everything else behind and preach day and night, depending on Krishna for the result, was increasing. He began regularly lecturing and chanting at various programs in the city, sometimes at several in one day. On Sundays, he would lecture at the Sadhana Mandir, another day at the Gita Mandir, another day at the Theosophical Society, and regularly in people's homes. Dr. Ram Mitra, the shopkeeper poet, maintained a Shiva temple near his home, and Abhay began to perform kirtan and lecture there. Sometimes Mr. Mitra would speak in Hindi on Bhagavad Gita at the Sadhana Mandir, and Abhay would attend. Sometimes Abhay would visit Dr. Mitra at his utensils shop. The shop was in a crowded Jhansi bazaar and opened onto the busy street. Abhay would sit down like an ordinary customer amid stacks of stainless steel buckets, plates, bowls, and lotas, and speak to Mr. Mitra and friends about Chaitanya Charitamrita. Or sometimes he would listen to Mr. Mitra tell about his published book of poetry and his literary reputation. Mr. Mitra saw that Abhay's ambition was no less than to make the whole city of Jhansi alive with Krishna consciousness. Abhay quoted Chaitanya Charitamrita. One who has received the great fortune of taking birth in India should make his life perfect and then do good for others by spreading Krishna consciousness. And Abhay would add, the whole world is waiting. Mr. Mitra, for our spiritual revolution. Mr. Mitra would nod, his handsome Nehru-like face forming a smile. But he saw that Abhay wanted people to do more than merely listening to him. He wanted them to do something. Once Mr. Mitra offered Abhay a copy of his book, showing him the foreword by a famous man, and repeatedly mentioned that the great sadhu Vinoba Bhave had liked the poems very much. When Mr. Mitra learned that Abhay was a regular milk drinker, he began offering Abhay fresh milk daily from his cow, a black cow, And black cows, Mr. Mitra said, gave especially good milk. Abhay invited Mr. Mitra to accompany him on foot to nearby villages along with a kirtan party for preaching. But Mr. Mitra declined, being unable to get anyone to tend the shop for him. Another young Ayurvedic doctor was Dr. Siddhi, who immensely expressed interest in Abhay's enthusiastic plans for spreading Krishna consciousness. Dr. Siddhi. He came several times to my place. I got a kirtan room on my roof. I've got a kirtan room in my roof, and he performed kirtan there, as well as the Gita Mandir. We were also going daily to the Theosophical Society. There was an atmosphere, a very pious, sacred, and calm atmosphere when the kirtan and preaching and lectures were performed. He used to play harmonium. The main thing was to perform kirtan and give a lecture on the Bhagavad-Gita and the life of Krishna. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was his Lord, and I also loved him. Radhilal Malik, secretary of the Gita Mandir and Sadhana Mandir, began meeting often with Abhay. Radhilal Malik. I was very much influenced by him. I used to spend 3 or 4 hours every morning in his association. He had many, many big scriptures. He was mainly concerned about the books about Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was also writing at that time. The president of the Gita Mandir and I both volunteered to cook for him. It was during a morning walk with Radhilal Malik that Abhay first spotted the Bharti Bhavan, a picturesque temple complex across from the large Antya pond. The neighborhood, known as Antya Tal, was quiet and sparsely populated. But it was near Sipri Road, the main thoroughfare between downtown Jhansi and Sipri Bazaar. Abhay inquired from Mr. Malik about the temple, and together they turned from the main road and walked down a sloping footpath that led through the main gates of the compound. There they found several secluded acres nestling within a grove of neem and mango trees. The main structure was the Radha Memorial. It was small, like a chapel, but its proportions were stout and bold. Sitting on the octagonal stone base, it rose on 8 ornate pillars of red and white chipped marble to a stone dome on top. 2 elephants bearing the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi, on their upraised trunks decorated the entrance. Concrete bunting and striping patterns of red, green, and blue added to the decorative yet massive effect. The entrance was marked with the words Radha Smarak carved in Hindi script, and above it the English translation Radha Memorial. When Abhay saw the Sanskrit inscription across the side of the stone temple, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Hare, he turned to Radhilal Malik and said strongly, "The Lord has built this temple for my use." From that moment, Abhay was determined to have the building. Mr. Malik explained that the temple had been built in 1939 as a memorial to the wealthy Vaishnava landowner Radha Bhai, but at the present was not in use. Dr. Prabhakar Mishra, whom Abhay had already met on several occasions, was occupying some of the rooms, but otherwise it was deserted. Mr. Malik and Abhay sought Mr. Mishra in his quarters in the main building, and when Dr. Mishra saw Abhay's enthusiasm, he invited Abhay to stay there with him. Dr. Mishra confirmed that except for his Sunday morning Gita class, the facility was still idle, and he welcomed Abhay to carry on his writing and preaching there. Abhay liked the idea. Immediately he began thinking of uses for the building, surveying the land with increasing interest. A second larger building also with stone pillars and facades held a hall and 5 rooms. Abhay made mental plans for each room. In this room, kirtans and lectures with large gatherings. In this room, the deity of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In these rooms, resident brahmacharis and sannyasis. Guests here, an office there, the printing press here. There were even land for grazing a cow. There was even land for grazing a cow. It was a self-contained unit. Hundreds of people could come for kirtan, prasadam, and discourses. Preachers could go out from here distributing back to Godhead magazines. Some could even go abroad with Lord Chaitanya's message. As Abhay and his companions walked through the compound, appreciating it as a suitable place to start an ashram, his companions encouraged him, saying they were sure that Mr. Ravi Shankar Bhayal, the agent who handled all the property of Radhabhai's descendants, would have no objection to Abhay's living there. Why couldn't the landlord give him the building? Abhay asked. They were simply going to waste. If it were actually to be a memorial to Radha, it should be used in Krishna's service, since Krishna is Radha's since Krishna is Radha's worshipable Lord. Abhay was determined, and his friends agreed to help him. First, they met with Līlāmṛta, who said that he was such a close friend of Mr. Bhayal's that Mr. Bhayal would probably give the place simply at his request. Dr. Shastri said that he also wanted to go to impress upon Mr. Bhayal how much the people of Jhansi wanted Abhay to have this place. When Reva Shankar Bhayal met with his friend Līlāmṛta, also present were Abhay, Dr. Shastri, Radhilal Mallik, Prabhakar Mishra, and Suryamukhi Sharma, a young educated Jhansi woman. They presented the case from several angles, and Mr. Bhayal listened. He agreed that he wasn't using the place at present, and this seemed to be a good cause. He agreed to let Abhay use the facilities for his League of Devotees for as long as he liked. Wow. And at Abhay's request, he agreed to become a member of the League. They shook hands. On behalf of the estate, Mr. Bhayal presented the Bharti Bhavan properties in charity to Abhay Charan De and the League of Devotees. Thank you. Anybody else want to read? No? Okay. We will continue then. During December and January, Abhay prepared a League of Devotees charter. He wanted to begin vigorous, extensive preaching, following the example of his spiritual master. Once he began to set his goals to paper, the project immediately began to expand beyond Jhansi, beyond India. Of course, the League of Devotees was for the young people of Jhansi. They were already expressing a great interest, but Abhay's charter described more than merely evening classes and kirtan. It was a broad scheme, including a description of the 4 orders of society: Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishyas, and Shudra. The detailed plans to accommodate a worldwide religious detailed plans to accommodate a worldwide religious movement. The charter set forth a probationary period for prospective members. It described spiritual initiation. It arranged for economic reciprocation between individual members and the League, and it was arranged to provide lodgings for preaching, and it defined prohibited activities: legitimate connection with women, intoxicating habits, diets other than regularly strictly on vegetable kingdom, gambling, and unnecessary sporting or recreation enterprises. To establish his league with the registrar in Lucknow, Abhay required a memorandum of association signed by the league members. In this document, which was to list the objectives of the society, Abhay expressed his vision for the continuation of his spiritual master's mission. Like the God brothers who had created new mathas after the dissolution of the Gaudiya Math, Abhay was forming a new branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya to be called the League of Devotees. He was not simply claiming proprietorship of a few buildings. He was establishing a Krishna conscious society that would expand into a world movement. His intentions were clear, not insular, but were directed towards creating centers for spiritual development all over the world. Abhay wrote, Lord Chaitanya revealed the transcendental process of approaching the absolute Godhead. And in his teachings, nothing appears to be absurd from the point of human reasoning, and nothing against any religion as accompanied by the humans and civilized people. In enumerating the League's goals, he included the opening of centers in all parts of the world, thus establishing the League as an international organization for spiritual developments through education, culture, as also by recruiting members from all nations, creeds, and castes. The League would publish literature in many languages and print a monthly magazine, Back to Godhead. Abhay obtained the necessary signatures for his memorandum of association. He then took the train to Lucknow and on February 4th paid the deposit of 55 rupees and filed his application. He returned to Jhansi. In his room in the Radha Memorial, Abhay would rise early at 4 a.m. and arouse his young neighbor, Prabhakar Mishra. From 4 to 5, Abhay would write. At 5, he would walk in the Antya-tal area. At 5:30, bathe and then chant Hare Krishna on his beads until 7, when he would hold a class on the Chaitanya Charitamrita or Srimad Bhagavatam, although Prabhakar Mishra was usually the only listener. At 8, he would return to his literary work, typing until after 10, when he would begin to prepare a meal. In the afternoon, he would often go to Jhansi, meeting people and preaching, looking for anyone willing to take part in the League of Devotees. In the early evening, he would write until 7, and he would prepare for the kirtan and lecture. He would hold at one of the various places in the city, depending on where he was invited. Although Abhay had no money for continuing Back to Godhead, a well-established part of his preaching was to write essays, regardless of whether they were to be immediately published or not. He wrote a long essay, some 24,000 words, entitled Message of Godhead. He also wrote a series of chapters propounding the teachings of Bhagavad-Gita, especially as they apply to the world problems, and Science of Devotion, a summary study of Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. On May 16, 1953, Abhay held a grand opening celebration for the League of Devotees, with continuous readings, kirtan and prasadam distribution from early morning until night. The buildings were decorated with leaves, flowers, and many earthen water pots. In the evening, when attendance was the greatest, Abhay returned from the 9th chapter of Bhagavad-Gita. Abhay lectured on the 9th chapter of Bhagavad-Gita on Rajaguhya Yoga. Prabhakar Mishra conducted a fire sacrifice and several brahmanas chanted mantras from Brahma Samhita. Guests received 16-page prospectus containing Abhay's essay on the need for the League and an excerpt from the charter, excerpt from the charter explaining its goals. It was signed Om Tat Sat, Abhay Charanara Bindo Bhaktivedanta, founder and secretary. The opening was a pleasant, auspicious event for the people of Jhansi, and hundreds gathered in the evening for Abhay's lecture. Dr. Sharma, a charter member of the League and editor of the Jhansi Daily newspaper, had already publicized the event and was planning a write-up for the following day. The Gaudiya Patrika also reported on the opening. The editor of the local Theosophical Society, Sri Lakshminarayan Rajapalli, was also present. Although he holds different philosophical opinions from Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, he is very sympathetic with this movement. In the assembly, there were many people worth mentioning. The inauguration and establishing of deities will be done soon. The assembly will request Rajapati, Sri K.M. Munshi, to perform the inauguration ceremony. Their center has been registered to the Society's Registration Act. Sri Bharti Bhavan is the name of the League's building, in which they have a lecture hall and a temple that resembles a palace. The assembly had many activities at the center, and there are also facilities for members to live alone. Abhay felt confident that the Bharti Bhavan would now be established and recognized as the home of the League of Devotees. He was happy to see that the opening day was not merely his private affair, but an event celebrated by the most important citizens of Jhansi. Okay, I think we'll stop here, unless someone wants to read for the last 10 minutes. So we will stop. Anybody want to share anything? It looks like in Jhansi he got some favorable association and was able to start the League of Devotees. So yeah, let's see how that goes. Okay, if not, guess we'll read again tomorrow.
Mata, what is the page number? I lost. I was listening actually. What is the page number we ended?
In my book, it is 157.
57. Okay.
Yeah, it's chapter 7.
Right.
Okay. Do you want to read, Mataji?
I can read 10 minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
So where was that, Mataji? Yeah, because during 1949, this one?
No.
Did you read it here?
His past life. See, in my book it is 157. I don't know what it is in your book, though, Mataji.
I had book page 157. It says during 1949 or
no.
Abhay began his first Bengali article by the National Week has begun. This one, Mataji?
No.
What is the paragraph, Mataji?
His past life was seeming further and further behind him each day. But one day after he had been in Jhansi. Well, I guess I can read another section. Maybe you can try to find it.
Sure.
Okay. His past life was seeming further and further behind him each day. But one day, after he had been in Jhansi about 6 months, a telegram arrived, bringing a startling reminder of his past connections. His business in Allahabad had been burglarized. His servants had stolen all his money and medicine and anything else of value. It had been a loss of 7,000 rupees. Abhay read the news, laughed, and uttered the Bhagavatam verse. Yasyaham anugrahnami harishye tad dhanam shane tato dhanam tyajanti asya swajana dukha dukhitam. Prabhakar Mishra advised Abhay to go back to Allahabad to recover what he could. No, Abhay said, this is good for me. I was sad, but now one great attachment has come to an end, and my life is fully surrendered and dedicated to Sri Sri Radha Madhava. Abhay's son Brindavan soon arrived in Jhansi, requesting Abhay to come to Calcutta to revive the business. Abhay Charande and sons. As they sat together in Abhay's room in the Radha Memorial, Abhay explained that he could not go back. He requested Brindavan to stay and assist him by doing typewriting. But Brindavan returned to Calcutta.
Why do you start the chapter 7, Jhansi, the lagoon of devotee, right?
Yes, it has been several pages, Mataji. I've already read about
All
10.
the pictures.
Read about 12 pages, yeah.
I'm sorry, Mataji, just because I was listening.
Yeah,
Not,
yeah, it's hard to find because it's not really a text.
yeah, because Prabhu always have on the screen and easy to find it.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, so anyway, it's already almost like 7. So
Yeah. Yeah. So then where it starts is from his first meeting with Prabhakar. Okay. So you can look for it. Okay. Thank you all. Nice reading together.
Are we going to have class tomorrow, Mataji? Because I won't be able to join tomorrow.
I don't know actually. Priyanka Mataji, do you know? Weekend are we reading?
Yes, Mataji. We are reading until April 9th. Yeah, every day.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
The same time, 5 o'clock, Mataji?
Yes, Mataji. Tomorrow, I don't know about Sunday, but tomorrow 5 to 7.
Oh, I won't be able to join. Okay.
Okay. Maybe you can listen, Mataji, if possible.
It's a big program, Mataji. It's going to be so loud out there.
Oh, okay.
I won't be. I love to. I don't want to miss. Well, I'll go to YouTube, and because YouTube you can go back.
Yes.
If I don't know if I'll be able to, I'll try.
Okay. I think we
I
should.
found this now. Now I found it from the first meeting. No.
Okay. I
Yeah,
think
that's fine. We'll do next.
Yeah.
week.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Please accept
Hare
my humble
Krishna,
obeisances
Prabhu,
and
Mataji.
prayers to Srila Prabhupada.
Srila-
Mataji, you said we're reading until April 9th.
Yeah.
Are we going to be finishing the Līlāmṛta by the 9th?
Yes,
Yes. Oh, okay. Haribol.
because
Okay.
April 10th we have big celebration at the temple.
Huh.
So April 9th is. I think we will, Mataji, because we already have like this book is almost like done by mid of Wednesday next week, right, Mataji?
Yes.